In October 2017, Las Vegas was the scene of the largest mass shooting in modern American history. A white male in his 60s shot into a crowd of concert-goers in the heart of the city, killing over 50 and injuring 500 more. It's the latest episode in a catalogue of mass shootings which have become a violent epidemic across the United States. Yet for some reason, despite the massive loss of life across recent years, these fatal attacks have not generally been described as terrorism.
This is mainly a male American problem. According to the respected Time magazine, since 1966, of 134 mass shooters who've preyed on Americans, just 3 have been women, making mass shooting a 98% male enterprise. These mass shootings have been committed by men who are often labelled not as terrorists, but as lone wolves or psychologically impaired. A love of guns amongst males is then defended as patriotism by many conservatives, and even as a form of white pride by right-wing activists. While the public remains shocked by such mass killings, and the leaders offer their warmest condolences, the public also remains deeply divided over any efforts to curb access to firearms. Fox News has claimed that nearly 7 in 10 Republicans believe that gun ownership is patriotic. So while thousands die every year from gun crime, citizens still have easy access to the very weapons which have killed hundreds of thousands of their fellow Americans in their own homeland in the last 10 years alone.
Would tighter gun regulations reduce gun violence in America? And why did the news reporting at the time of the Las Vegas incident not treat it as a terrorist attack? Simple questions with very important answers. In the United States, there have been 273 shootings by October this year, in which more than 4 people were wounded or killed. Why is American society so violent? We put that to the American public. Here's what they told us.
If you have no restraint in your behavior and you don't believe in moral absolutes, and you think this life is all there is, and then you're going to pass into nothingness, there's a tendency to think of number one, looking out for number one. What can I get now? It doesn't matter who I hurt or what I do.
We've given more people the access to guns, and we don't have strict enough gun laws.
Well, to me, it's always been violence. That's why, you know, they're not kneeling to the flag and all that, because the flag doesn't represent the same thing for everybody. Some people say, okay, why you pledge allegiance or you're not kneeling to the flag? The flag represents that to you, but not to me. The flag represents something different. Slavery and oppression and all those other things. We as people of color, we weren't even considered citizens when the Constitution was written.
I think there's so much violence in our society because the media has done a very good job of dividing us.
Yeah, media promotes it. I remember being back in high school, they gave a statistic that Canada didn't show violence, rapes, robberies, nothing on their news stations, and their crime rate was a lot lower than the U.S.
I do think it is a cultural issue, and I can't tell you the tipping point that created it. The fact that we will resort to violence to try to either make our point or to counter our point by that type of physical rebuttal to someone, I can't tell you, but it is as much as a logistical problem of having so many weapons, it's a cultural problem. We have 300 million guns in circulation, so there's easy access to weapons, particularly guns. So as a percentage of the population, that's not a large number, but it's a significant number, so I think it's the access to weapons.
That's definitely mental health issues, so I think this country kind of tries to sweep that under the rug, along with there's no reason for us to have automatic weapons. We're not at war.
The lobbyists who support weaponry, like the NRA, like munitions manufacturers, create the illusion that the redcoats are going to come, because I don't believe they are. Like there are lots of elements of the Constitution that are not applicable nearly 300 years later.
There has never been any remorse or any apology by any American government for the mass murder that European settlers carried out. There has never been any rehabilitation of what happened all those years ago. So violence, killing, is in the DNA of much of the American population today. Then, of course, we have the availability of guns, which is permitted in accordance with the American Constitution. And then we have Hollywood. Some of the films, or many of the films that come out of Hollywood, really are shocking in nature. The amount of violence, be it killing, be it rape, be it robbery, once again infects the minds of many people in America. So if you put that all together, the fact that the mass murders carried out by European settlers against the Native Americans entered the DNA of the American people today. If we put that together with the availability of guns, and if we combine that with Hollywood, we can start to understand why American society is so very, very violent.
I think there are a variety of complex reasons as to why American society is so violent. I mean, if you look at America's inception, it was founded on violence. You know, violence was imposed on them by the British, and then they imposed violence on the Native Americans. And in the 19th, 20th and 21st centuries, we've seen violence both from the state and individuals against people who essentially aren't white, aren't male, or who aren't American. That has been a constant throughout American history. It's one of the most liberalized nations in the world, yet violence is still one of the central kind of cornerstones of American culture. At the end of the day, look, it's a dog-eat-dog capitalist economic system where everybody is encouraged to fend for themselves. You mix that with a kind of toxic macho culture, incredibly lax gun laws, and that socioeconomic system that makes sure that people do feel hopeless and do feel alienated, that is an incredibly toxic mixture.
Would tighter regulation of gun laws solve the problem of gun violence? And why? We asked the American public.
I think they need to be outlawed, honestly. I think Australia is a good, so it's certain countries, most of Europe, that kind of thing. I mean, it's not the Wild West anymore. You know, if you want a gun to shoot animals to eat, out in Montana or Colorado or even the Appalachians, that's fine. But you don't need an AR, whatever it is, or, even handguns I think are ridiculous.
I don't believe that changing gun laws and enforcing different gun laws is going to affect the violence that we're seeing. You will see it. You may see it on a smaller scale, but I don't even think that's really the fact. I have a good friend in Australia. Australia did the gun buyback, has very stiff gun law restrictions, and what I understand is that violent crime has not decreased as a result. And I've asked my friends to verify this because you see all the memes on the internet, and I don't want to believe fake news, but I don't know.
That depends on the regulation. I do not believe that anyone needs an automatic weapon, but I do believe in our right to bear arms to protect ourselves and our families, such as a small handgun. If someone comes into your home with an automatic weapon, you need to be able to protect yourself and your family. If they come into your home with an automatic weapon, they intend to harm you or kill you.
It probably would have a minimal, if any, impact from my view, unless us as Americans are willing to cooperate and say, in particular, military-style weapons should not be in possession of citizens. It should only be with the police and military. Then I don't know how much regulation would have an impact on the bottom number there.
You can have all the gun laws and all the gun control you want, but once again, it's the individual's mindset that goes out there and wants to pull the trigger and wants to do something stupid.
Neither the Democrats or the Republicans appear to want to do this because they're in the pockets of lobbyists. It's all about money, right?
To me, it won't solve it, but you still do the right best thing to reduce it. You're not going to solve it. The horse is out of the barn. You want to try to have less horses go out of the barn. No, you're not going to solve it. There are too many weapons available, but you still don't need to make it easier for people to do the wrong thing.
Despite the horrific events in Las Vegas, there is going to be no gun control in America. In recent years, there have been many, many massacres involving firearms, and yet nothing comes of that. Why? I think principally because the gun lobby in America, which is led by the National Rifle Association, is formidable in its reach and in its influence. The gun lobby is one of the most powerful in America. Also, we have to take into consideration that the American Constitution allows its citizens to bear arms. So when we consider that every year in America there are approximately 100,000 shootings, of that about 30,000 people die, combined with the fact that around 50% of the world's gun control is actually in America, then we start to realise just how futile any efforts will be to try and bring about gun control in America, and I say that regrettably.
I think that there are kind of some policies that can be put forward to help the problem of gun violence, increased background checks, more in-depth background checks, involving criminal activity or mental health problems. These are common sense ideas that would be beneficial for gun shop owners, gun owners themselves, and the general public. But the problem that we have here is that there are so many gun owners in America that many of these would maybe have to forfeit what they believe to be an American freedom and a right.
Since World War II, the United States has followed an extremely aggressive foreign policy. Does the American public think the violence abroad has contributed to a violent culture at home?
I don't know if I'm really fully qualified to answer that. I do believe that there have been times that we've needed to step in out of compassion and out of the need to help people that need help against those in their countries that seek to do them harm.
I don't think it has anything to do with the United States foreign policy. I think those are separate issues. I think it starts on the individual level in the breakdown of the family. Children need two parents. They need a mother. They need a father. They need a secure environment to grow up in. And then when you don't have that, and you see around you that you think the way to get things is through taking it or through avenues that are not productive, if you don't have a vision for your future, I think that contributes to it, the feeling of hopelessness maybe.
Not totally educated enough to answer your question, other than using violence to make a point, I think creates obviously a culture where you think that is the best right first thing to do. I think that diplomacy, talking to people first, versus the first is I'm going to occupy your country, or what have you. If you look at the current special on Vietnam, we don't learn anything. Iraq is the same issue as Vietnam. So is Afghanistan, where we create a dialogue to justify invading other people and using force to help them solve their problem when they need to solve it themselves.
There are always going to be problems in European and South America, in Africa, in Asia. But let's take care of ourselves once and for all and take care of America. If there's a situation that a government is going to go down because of a Marxist government or something like that, yes, we can intercede. But slow down, America. Enough's enough.
I think America has just always been a violent country. It's a new country, so it doesn't have the myth and a lot of stories and kind of interconnectedness that Europe or Asia or the Middle East have. It's new, so I think that they've kind of were raised on going out and killing and protecting, and I think they're just violent by nature. Sorry, I do. As a female American, I think they're just out of control.
Because of the colonial history of Americans, violence is in their DNA, and I think that can help to explain why America has such an aggressive, murderous foreign policy. If we look at the carnage that the Americans have caused in the last 25 years, from the former Yugoslavia to Afghanistan to Iraq to Libya and of course to Syria, we see that the Americans have blood up to their necks, but then that doesn't seem to play much on the minds of ordinary Americans because they are so conditioned to violence in their everyday lives. They see it on their streets, they see it on their television sets in the form of news or films. The young people experience it when they play on their computer games or on their consoles. So I think that violence is just an everyday part of life for Americans.
Yeah, no, without a doubt, American foreign policy has in a sense legitimized mass murder at home. I mean, in the last decade we've seen America take part in many interventions in the Middle East, many violent atrocities happening there. In previous decades gone by we've seen atrocities in Korea, in Vietnam and in Latin America as well. And now these kind of escapades by the American state are glorified in their popular culture. But in reality, American foreign policy is violent, it's macho, and it's indiscriminate when it comes to civilian casualties. So of course, there are many complex reasons as to why American society is so violent. But at the end of the day, look, when it comes to America's foreign policy, the state have set an example, and sadly, the people have followed.
Let's look at the facts. Between 2001 and 2014, deaths by terrorism in America numbered 3,412. In the same period, there have been over 440,000 deaths by firearms. In 2017, by September, there were over 11,600 deaths as a result of gun violence. On average, in America, there is now one mass shooting per day.
The shooter in Las Vegas, who killed over 50 people and injured hundreds more, has been described as a lone wolf. Why was he not described as a terrorist? Here's what the American public thought.
We throw terrorists, that term, around kind of loosely, so I think it's more for the terrorists that are overseas coming here to kill us, not the people that are domestic. They're just some of these crazy people that they snap.
It equates to terrorism in my book. That's splitting hairs to say it was or was not a terrorist. Clearly, what he did was beyond the pale. Everybody would like to know why, but we can't always know the whys of people's actions.
I am baffled by the fact that the individual that killed all of those people in Las Vegas was not identified as a terrorist.
I think any violent act against multiple people is a terrorist act. And I don't know why they separate the two and call some things hate crimes and some things terrorists. To me, they're both just one and the same. So why not label them the same? Until, like I said earlier, until we're able to be truthful about even definition of things, then we're never going to solve the problems.
He is a terrorist in my mind. Anyone who's going to take down a whole crowd of people, for whatever reasons, is a terrorist. And like what my friend believes, it's all about color.
In my opinion, he's not categorized as a terrorist because this wasn't he's not Muslim, and he didn't have a religious, from what I've gathered, he didn't have a religious goal in taking action like he did.
We're still at a very early stage in terms of investigating the background and possible motives of the person who committed that heinous atrocity in Las Vegas. But I think it's only fair at this moment in time not to categorize him as a terrorist. A terrorist is someone who commits a crime, a terrible crime, for ideological reasons. It appears that, and I emphasize, it appears at this moment in time that the perpetrator of the Las Vegas atrocity may very well have been suffering from a very serious mental illness. If that is concluded by the authorities in America, then of course he was not a terrorist. He was someone who was insane.
Well, the real simple answer is because he's white and he's a male. The discourse surrounding terrorism and extremism is usually reserved for people from the Middle East, usually to either whip up racial tensions at home or whip up support for American interventions in Middle Eastern countries like Syria or Iraq. For example. Now, because he is a white male and because he is American, the mainstream media are intent on talking about his potential mental health problems, the fact that he acted alone and not part of a group, or just the fact that his family think he's a really quiet, lovely guy. He's kind of the salt of the earth, and this is a really transparent and pathetic argument to make, especially when you take into account that white men are by far the most dangerous demographic for the American people, whether it be from gun violence, domestic violence, or mass murder.
The gun lobby in the United States is one of the strongest and well-funded in the country. Does the American public think that because of that lobby's power and influence, the issue of gun regulation might never be addressed?
I think it'll be addressed, and they've some of the administrations have tried. I know it's going to be brought to the table again. Trump just said not today when somebody asked him about it, but I'm sure it'll be brought up, hopefully, and hopefully they'll do something about it and take some of the guns away from the people that shouldn't have them.
A big role. I mean, it's all politics, ain't it? Fortunately, we can't trust politics. They're on for their own good, not necessarily for the good of the people. Until we really realize that we have to watch who we give guns to, I think no change is going to matter or be made.
58% of people supposedly approve of better gun control. Then the people in power should implement what the people ask.
I think the fact that they have that both Democrats and Republicans are so much in the pocket of these people, it's not going to change. There's a lot. Why is this country so forward in saying that it's the land of the free and it's a true democracy, when if you look at the voting system here, why would I, if I was a wealthy gun manufacturer, why would I give you millions if you're a politician? There's a reason for that. I want to buy you. It's a form of bribery. But legalized bribery.
They didn't change anything after Virginia Tech and then Sandy Hook with elementary school children being killed, and they've done nothing since then.
We can never say never, but I think it's fair to say that it is extremely unlikely that there will be gun control in America, principally because the gun lobby in America, led by the National Rifle Association, is so influential, it is so powerful, and we can also say that the gun lobby has its man in the White House in the form of Donald Trump, because Donald Trump is a vehement supporter of gun ownership. He vehemently opposes any controls on gun ownership. And of course, people from the NRA are some of his core supporters. They constitute a core supporter base for Mr. Trump. So while Mr. Trump is in power, it is inconceivable that there will be gun controls introduced in America. But I would say that about his successor and the successor after that.
The NRA are one of the most powerful lobby groups in America. You know, we've had mass atrocities, mass shootings in America before, and nothing has really been done. And that's mostly down to the NRA. Look, if the NRA had their way, then these mass murderers would have silencers on their guns, so people don't even hear them coming. Look, we have a Republican presidency who are ideologically opposed to gun control, but even if we didn't, you know, the kind of gun lobby in America is so vast and so powerful. I kind of consider it as one of the most dangerous viruses in Washington. And no matter whether you're a Republican or you're a Democrat, it's very, very difficult to stand up to these people, because all it takes is a quick donation here nor there, and their allegiances are tied to the gun lobby.
The question is, why is all this happening? Is it because the country was founded on violence and brutalization of the indigenous population, and now it has been established in the culture of the nation? Or could it be because since the Second World War, the United States has contributed to the killing of over 20 million people across 37 different countries, and bombed, occupied and conducted regime change operations across 5 different continents.
Some say all the violence abroad has contributed to a violent society at home. The fact is, in this latest shooting, more than 50 people were fatally wounded and over 500 more injured in a single incident in Las Vegas. Critics say this will keep happening until the US addresses its gun laws at home and its foreign policy of violence abroad. And that leads to the simplest question of all. If nothing is done, how many more will die on the streets of America?
forces